Verse 2 is what we're on today here. Isaiah 49, verse 2. He made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand, he hid me. He made me a polished arrow. In his quiver, he hid me away. When I was a kid, one of my favorite movies was The Hobbit, the cartoon version one. And in that story, in the book, in the movie, right near the end, the pivotal moment has to do with a special arrow. The man, his name is Bard, is standing in his city that's being burned, just, destroyed by Smaug the dragon. And he's heard word from Bilbo through a bird that there is this one spot, the underside of the underbelly of the dragon, that is bare. That big. When he hears this, he looks and he sees the spot. And he pulls out from his quiver one special arrow. It's all black. He says, "Black arrow, I had you from my father and he from his," right? "Go now and speed well." And he shoots it right into that spot and kills the dragon. That's a polished arrow. That's a perfect weapon. That's what you need in order to defeat some enemy. You need a perfect weapon. You need something that is honed and polished. It's going to work exactly like you want it to. It's going to fly straight and true. Jesus says this about himself. It's Hebrew poetry here, so it's two lines that share a similar idea. He made my mouth like a sharp sword. And then he says, in the shadow of his hand, he hid me. And then he says, he made me a polished arrow in his quiver. He hid me away. So obviously, he's talking about a weapon in each one. And the idea of he hid me, he covered me, it's like he's keeping me safe, but for some purpose. Bard in The Hobbit kept that black arrow, but for the purpose of shooting it. Right? He wasn't just going to shoot it at just anybody. He was keeping it for when he really needed it. So also Jesus is saying here about his Father. The Father sent Jesus to be his weapon. And Jesus is God's weapon in order to destroy death and hell and sin, that ancient dragon, who is the devil and Satan, as Revelation puts it. And God protects Jesus. He hides him in the shadow of his hand. He hides him away in his quiver, but only until that moment on the cross. Jesus was the perfectly polished arrow for that, who was completely obedient to the Father's will in our place, completely, perfectly fulfilling the law where you and I never do. And then, even as he was pierced through with a spear, even as he was pierced through with nails in his hands and feet, even as he was pierced in his brow with thorns, he himself was the arrow piercing into the heart of death and hell. And what a contrast this is. The weapons of the world are real weapons, right? Bloody swords and spears, tanks and jet fighters. And it seems so often like the world can't figure out any other way to settle its differences than with violence. Can't seem to stop trying to enforce, we do this too, to enforce our will on other people by power to get what we want. That's how the kingdoms of this world operate. But Jesus is the only weapon that the Father uses to establish his kingdom, to save us, to defeat his enemies. And the only blood that Jesus sheds is his own. And by doing so, he becomes the death of death, and he becomes the life of all those who believe in him, because he's the perfect weapon. Now, we talked about him being that arrow, but remember also that he says that his mouth is a sword, and that's the word of God. Remember this, today and every day, that it is the word of God which is your weapon. When you're talking about fighting the battles that God has laid out for you, sharing his word with other people, finding strength and faith to face the troubles of the day, raising your children, The weapon for you to go to is always the Word. It is that sharp sword, as Hebrews talks about, which can pierce to the divisions of soul and spirit, discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. That Word is Jesus, the Word made flesh, the weapon that God hid away for that special purpose. He's the only thing, the only weapon that conquers and saves. Amen.